In the pre-dawn hours of July 16, 1945, the smartest people on the planet counted down to the end of the world, half convinced they were about to destroy all life on Earth. 3, 2. At 1, harsh white light turned desert sand to glass. From the observation posts, stunned silence gave way to cheers. A bottle of whiskey made the rounds as the observers congratulated one another. The race against Hitler was over, and they had won. Or had they? For years, they had pushed themselves to the limit to create the most powerful weapon in human history, desperate to stop a dictator. But Hitler was gone. The weapon remained. And the smartest people in the world were about to learn that though they had the power to split an atom, they couldn't stop the chain reaction that followed. Leo Szilard had an uncanny habit of predicting the future. Or maybe he just knew how to read the writing on the wall. So when Hitler came to power in 1933, Szilard didn't wait for the inevitable purge of Jewish professors. He resigned from his post before he could be expelled and fled to London, where he helped fellow academics flee the Reich. Within months, Germany's universities had been hollowed out. The institutions that had once churned out Nobel laureates by the dozens were now Nazi training camps, more interested in burning books than reading them. But the Reich's loss was the Allies' gain. American and British universities were suddenly flooded by Nobel laureates on the cutting edge of scientific research. By 1938, these exiled professors were growing very, very worried. Not only because of concentration camps or fascism, but because 2 German chemists had accidentally discovered nuclear fission, a world-changing breakthrough with horrifying implications. During nuclear fission, an unstable atom splits in half, setting off a chain reaction that releases vast amounts of energy. Energy that can be harnessed to build a bomb big enough to wipe out a city, or worse. Only Germany had the knowledge, the infrastructure, and the materials to build a bomb of this scale. And it didn't take a Nobel Prize in physics to realize that a nuclear Reich was a very, very bad idea. Someone had to alert President Roosevelt. Now, despite his brilliance, Leo Szilard was a nobody in America. Sure, he was a genius with dozens of patents under his belt. But in the US, he was just another Jewish refugee with a thick accent, trying to warn the leader of the free world about a threat that sounded straight out of science fiction. Luckily, Szilard had friends in high places. For years, he and Albert Einstein worked side by side in the most cutting-edge German labs. More than a decade later, here they were, 2 Jewish scientists who had fled the Nazis, confronting the prospect of a nuclear Germany. No one knew Szilard, but everyone knew Einstein, the eccentric Nobel winner who had revolutionized humans' understanding of space and time. So in the summer of 1939, Szilard and a colleague took a road trip to Einstein's Long Island cabin, where they ate cucumber sandwiches and argued over how to word the letter that would change the world. The arguments paid off. After Roosevelt read the letter, he called in his aide. "This," he said, waving the letter in the air, "requires action." The race was on to find the world's most brilliant minds. Serious people who could evaluate whether a nuclear bomb was even possible, and who would do anything to make sure that the Nazis didn't get there first. Luckily, the United States had no shortage of brilliant minds, many of whom had a very personal reason to prevent the Nazis from getting a bomb. There was Einstein, of course, whose Nobel-winning theories were dismissed as Jewish physics by the Nazi regime. There was Enrico Fermi, who fled fascist Italy when anti-Jewish race laws threatened his family. There were Leo Szilard and Edward Teller and Eugene Wigner, a trio of Hungarian Jews affectionately nicknamed the Martians for their seemingly supernatural intelligence and incomprehensible language. And of course, there was Robert Oppenheimer, a Jewish American motivated by, in his words, a continuing smoldering fury about the treatment of Jews in Germany. Unwittingly, Hitler's anti-Jewish policies handed the United States the single most important resource needed to build a nuclear bomb: human capital. Brilliant, capable, creative human capital with every incentive in the world to throw themselves into defying Nazi Germany. And that's how the top-secret, pedal-to-the-metal initiative to build a nuclear bomb got its start. They called it the Manhattan Project. As director of the secret laboratory in a secret city in the middle of nowhere, Oppenheimer took his mandate seriously. He had never been particularly healthy, but now his drinking and chain-smoking reached an all-time high. He barely slept or ate. The stress of building the world's first nuclear weapon whittled him down into a walking skeleton. Like all the other people working on the Manhattan Project, he worried about Hitler getting there first. It was hard not to feel the urgency in the air. As Eugene Wigner later joked, Thoughts of being murdered? Focus your mind wonderfully. But what none of them knew yet was that they were the only ones in this race. At the end of 1944, credible military intelligence trickled into the secret city in the desert. The scientists were shocked to learn that though the war was still raging, the Nazis didn't have the resources, the money, or the manpower to invest in a nuclear bomb. So they never even got close. And some of the American physicists began to wonder, why unleash such a weapon at all? Yet, only one scientist asked to be released from Los Alamos. Joseph Rotblat had poured everything into the race to stop the regime that had murdered his wife. But when he learned that Germany was no longer a nuclear threat, Rotblat lost his reason to fight, and he left Los Alamos, terrified of the danger that the Manhattan Project had unleashed. But the government had poured billions into this project, and it was too late to turn back. So even as other scientists worried that they were opening Pandora's box, no one else asked to be pulled from the project. They were standing on the brink of the kind of breakthrough that most scientists only dream about, making history with every experiment. Besides, the war wasn't over. Hitler was still in power, systematically emptying Europe of its Jews, and that American superweapon was valuable leverage against the man who had kicked off this horrible war. Some of the scientists, including Oppenheimer, were convinced that they were building a path to world peace, that the atom bomb had the potential to end all wars forever, so they kept working, wary but willing to see the project through. Everything changed when the Nazis surrendered. Szilard and his fellow scientists had raced the clock, convinced they were on the front lines against the ultimate evil. But now that the ultimate evil was vanquished, there was no reason to keep tinkering with a weapon this powerful, no reason to unleash something so dangerous into the world, where it could easily fall into the wrong hands. Unlike the American government, the scientists weren't thinking about defeating Japan or about flexing in front of the USSR. Those were the concerns of heads of state. But Leo Szilard was not a head of state. He was a scientist and a refugee who alerted Roosevelt to the possibility of a nuclear Reich. In 1939, he was worried about what would happen if a genocidal madman got his hands on a superweapon. By 1945, the madman was gone. World War II had already ravaged the globe, costing more than 80 million lives without an atomic bomb. Maybe there were no right hands to wield a superweapon. With dawning horror, Leo Szilard realized that his desperate letter to Roosevelt had set a terrible mistake in motion. But Pandora's box wasn't fully open yet. The technology wasn't tested. The bomb might not work, which gave Szilard a tiny window of opportunity to slam the box shut once and for all. Once more, he needed to talk to the leader of the free world, which meant he needed Einstein. But this time, the smartest men in the world wouldn't be advocating for more nuclear research. They would be campaigning against it. Einstein had been instrumental to the creation of the Manhattan Project, but he never actually worked on the bomb. As a leftist, a pacifist, and a Zionist, he would never have the security clearance necessary to work on the project, but he could still write letters of introduction to American presidents. So in May of 1945, Szilard raced to Washington, hoping to convince Truman that a nuclear America would prompt the most dangerous arms race in human history. But the president blew him off, sending Szilard to meet a colleague who had no idea who Szilard was or what he wanted. In the lab and among friends, Leo Szilard was a genius. In the halls of power, he was a nobody. Szilard did his best to make a case against a nuclear America, growing visibly frustrated as the politician shrugged him off. But Truman's colleague didn't understand why this short, angry man was lecturing him about all-out nuclear war, and he hustled Szilard out of his office without bothering to hide his annoyance. It was too late to close Pandora's box. 2 months later, the scientists of Los Alamos put their bomb to the test. Though it was close to 4 a.m., everyone was wide awake. They stared into the darkness, nerves bristling as they prepared to face any outcome, including the end of the world. To break the tension, Fermi made outlandish predictions, as Oppenheimer bet another scientist $10 that the bomb wouldn't work at all, and Edward Teller slathered himself with sunscreen in the pre-dawn darkness, passing the bottle around in case of radiation. No one else took him up on the offer. But the bomb worked, and very quickly the initial relief and celebrations gave way to a low-level existential despair. They had built this bomb to beat Hitler, but with the Reich already defeated, only one target remained. A target that had never crossed most of the scientists' minds as they worked overtime to build the weapon that would stop the Nazis. True, Japan had attacked the US first and committed unspeakable atrocities across Asia and the Pacific, but its cities were teeming with civilians, Innocent people who had nothing to do with Nazis or death marches or mechanized slaughter. Men, women, and children who would be vaporized instantly if the US dropped a nuclear bomb on a population center. Oppenheimer comforted himself by pointing out that the Japanese seemed content to fight to the death. If they didn't surrender, American soldiers would keep dying. And for what? Now that the US had created a weapon that could end all future wars, they had a moral imperative to use it, didn't they? Some of the scientists were swayed by Oppenheimer's argument. Not Szilard. He tried one last time to convince Truman to reconsider, even circulating a petition among the scientists of the Manhattan Project. But the petition never even made it to Truman's desk, because now that the bomb was ready, government officials didn't care what the scientists wanted. They had fulfilled their purpose. The soldiers would take it from here. So like every other civilian in the United States, Oppenheimer and his team learned about Hiroshima from the radio. The scientists at Los Alamos had heard about the brutality of the war in the Pacific. They knew that the Japanese had dug in, ready to die rather than surrender. They hoped the bomb would convince the emperor to give up his doomed campaign against the United States without any more American casualties. So when the news about Hiroshima came through, Los Alamos erupted in cheers. Oppenheimer accepted their applause like a proud new father, certain his new creation had just ended the bloodiest war in history. But 3 days later, his smile disappeared. He had not expected the second bomb on Nagasaki. He would later tell Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." So did most of the other scientists. Szilard left nuclear physics entirely, horrified by his part in what he called one of the greatest blunders of history. Einstein lamented his role as the one great mistake of my life and spent the rest of his days fighting for disarmament. So did Oppenheimer, and it cost him his political career. When the US government debated building a hydrogen bomb, a weapon many times more powerful than an atomic bomb, Oppenheimer strongly advised against. But his former colleague Edward Teller, who threw himself into the project, believed Oppenheimer's reluctance would hinder America's progress. The Cold War was raging, and if the US wanted to remain a superpower, it needed the most cutting-edge weapons to counter the threat of the USSR. So Teller testified to the United States Atomic Energy Commission that Oppenheimer should not be trusted with the vital interests of this country, and the commission listened. Less than a decade after he handed the United States its first nuclear bomb, Oppenheimer was stripped of his security clearance. If Nagasaki had taught him that he was powerless to influence policy, this new disgrace only emphasized how disposable he really was. His power had never extended beyond the lab.
Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Like humanity's earliest ancestors, the scientists who built the bomb learned that they could create fire. But once it caught, they were powerless to put out the flame.